evening. Good evening. I'm Bob Zimmer. I'm president of the University of Chicago, and it is a great pleasure to welcome you here this evening to the inaugural event of a new series called Meeting of the Minds. So Meeting of the Minds is a series in which faculty from the Booth School of Business will be in moderated discourse with faculty from around the university who are involved in humanistic inquiry. I want to especially acknowledge Dean Madhav Rajan from the Booth School and Shadi Barch, director of the Stavanovich Institute on the Formation of Knowledge, who together have led the formation of this series. The series, on which I'm sure you will find the inaugural event interesting, really is an exemplar of something that's very important about the University of Chicago as a whole. And that is the recognition that as problems and issues develop a certain level of complexity, it is extremely important for understanding these issues to bring multiple perspectives about these issues to bear. There's never one way of looking at a complex problem, and there's never one way that captures the entire scope of how to think about the problem. And this almost habit at the University of Chicago and this ongoing effort to bring people together around this is a wonderful vehicle for recognizing assumptions, challenging assumptions, sharpening ideas, and gaining a type of understanding that is fluid and expansive and leaves behind a all too common claim to understanding in which one is very complacently rigid in one's beliefs. So what you're hearing tonight as the first beginning of this series is not just important for the Booth School, not just important for the Stavanovich Institute, but really reflective of something very important about the University of Chicago as a whole. So I'm now going to pass the floor to Dean Madhav Rajan, who's going to introduce tonight's participants. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Bob. Good evening, everyone. My name is Madhav Rajan. As Bob said, I'm the Dean of Chicago Booth. It truly is a pleasure to see so many of you here today and for me to welcome this distinguished panel. So I'm going to start at the end. Our first panelist is William Howell, who's the Sidney Stein Professor in American Politics at the University of Chicago. He's chair of the Political Science Department, and he also has appointments at the Harris School of Public Policy and the college. So Professor Howell has written extensively on separation of powers issues and American political institutions, in particular the presidency. He is currently working on research projects on President Obama's education initiatives, on the origins of political authority, and the normative foundations of executive power. Professor Howell is author or co-author of numerous books, most recently Relic, How the Constitution Undermines Effective Government and Why We Need a More Powerful Presidency, which he wrote with Terry Moe at Hoover. As well as his forthcoming book, Reckoning, The American Presidency, Populism, and the Future of American Democracy. Professor Howell has been a fellow at the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford. His research has been supported by the NSF, the Smith-Richardson Foundation, the Democracy Fund, and the Bradley Foundation. Please join me in welcoming William Howell. Our next panelist next to me is Raghuram Rajan, who is the Katherine Dusak Miller Distinguished Service Professor of Finance at Chicago Booth. Professor Rajan served as the 23rd Governor of the Reserve Bank of India from September 2013 till September 2016. Prior to that, from 2003 to 2006, he was Director of Research and Chief Economist at the International Monetary Fund. Raghu's primary research interests are banking, corporate finance, and economic development, and in particular, the role that finance plays in development. He co-authored in 2003 with Luigi Zingales from Chicago Booth, Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists. Then in 2010, he wrote Fault Lines, How Hidden Fractures Still Threaten the World Economy. And for that book, he received the Best Business Book of 2010 award from Financial Times and Goldman Sachs. His latest book, The Third Pillar, How Markets and the State Leave the Community Behind, came out in February. Please welcome Raghuram Rajan. And finally, we're thrilled to have as the moderator Bret Stephens, op-ed columnist at the New York Times. Before joining the Times in 2017, Bret spent many years at the Wall Street Journal, most recently as the deputy editorial page editor, and for 11 years a foreign affairs columnist. And prior to that, Bret was editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. So Bret won the Pulitzer Prize for Commentary in 2013 and the 2019 Ellis Island Medal of Honor. He's the author of America in Retreat, The New Isolationism and the Coming Global Disorder. Bret holds a BA from the University of Chicago and an MSc from the London School of Economics. We're thrilled to have Bret today to moderate this evening's discussion titled Democracy, Populism, and Capitalism, Are They Compatible? Please welcome Bret Stephens.
Well, Dean, thank you. Is my mic on? I'm audible to all of you. Thank you for the introduction. And I still think that intellectually the greatest distinction I hold is my bachelor's degree from this university, which was, unlike the others, actually difficult to get. So the themes of tonight's event are democracy, capitalism, and populism. And I think we all have a reasonably good idea of what we mean by democracy and capitalism, but let's talk about populism and the phenomenon. Well, let me start with you. What is it? Why are we witnessing a resurgence? Why are we witnessing it globally? And to borrow a line from Tolstoy, is this a tale of unhappy families being unhappy in their own ways? Or is there an overarching theme in a story that extends well beyond the United States?
How much time do we have, right? So these are big questions. I'm really glad. First of all, I want to say what an honor it is to be here and to be with all of you and to share the stage with these two.
Be expansive and concise.
Okay, I'll do my best. So let me take a couple of pieces of this. What is populism, and why do we see it in so many places? Why is it a local phenomenon, or is there something larger at work here? What is populism? This is a contested topic. It's a nebulous topic. Generalizing about populism invites all kinds of disagreement that's substantive in nature. It's really hard to pin down. Let me start by saying what it is not, in my view. Yeah, you're watching. Okay. What it is not is a commitment to standing up for the disenfranchised in and of itself. A view that the little guy has been kicked around and we ought to do something on behalf of the little guy. That populism is larger. It certainly involves the little guy, and it certainly involves the public at large, but a particular notion of what the public is. And it stands in opposition to, and this is crucial, it stands in opposition to political elites, or a political establishment, or an existing political order. And there's a sense in which the populist argues, both in his, and they're almost all his, when you think about elites, that is, populists who stand in front of populist movements, they argue against the legitimacy of the existing political order. And they do so in sweeping terms. And they claim to stand for the public at large. Now, they typically have a particular view about who the public is. The public is not necessarily a majority. It's certainly not a random sample of the larger public. It typically involves, in our case, in the United States, some notion of who true Americans are, right? The true harbingers of our political heritage and our political values. And so it's this oppositional stance that what the populist argues is that we need to sort of do away with existing institutions and those who occupy them. And so why is it taking hold domestically? Why has it taken hold in Europe? Why has it taken hold regularly in Latin America?
Populists are not revolutionaries.
So this is good. It depends on what you mean by revolutionary. I think populists are decidedly anti-establishment. They argue against and they push back against the legitimacy of existing political institutions in forceful ways. They're not revolutionaries in the sense that they want to clearly, in well-defined ways, replace one existing political order with another. It's not, I want change in the service of getting rid of these institutions so that we can have these over here, which will be better. It's really an oppositional stance. It's really about, to my mind, tearing down and arguing against, principally. So people who study populism sometimes equate it to, and now I'm going to instantly get into, they equate it to a parasite that lives off of a host, that can thrive, but that requires the host. It requires something to be opposed to. And so,
are you talking about being culturally or institutionally oppositional? Because those seem to me
they go together.
Different.
They go together, I would say. The expressions of populism can take many different forms. It often is, we need to recover our true national heritage. We've lost our way as Americans, and true Americans are being ignored and snubbed by an existing political order and the elites that occupy it, right? And there are cultural and, dare I say, racial and class elements to these arguments. But they also reflect themselves in arguments against the legitimacy of existing democratic institutions, right? So it's an argument against Washington, D.C. as it's constructed. There are arguments against, right? We think about the administrative state not as a set of bureaus and agencies that are working on behalf of the public good, albeit in inefficient and flawed ways. You see it as the swamp, right? That has been captured by elites that's working against the public. That's the kind of language that's used. And it's...
So is that anti-democratic or pro-democratic?
It's anti-institutional, and I think it often takes the form of being anti-democratic. That is, populists often will argue against the legitimacy of a free and independent press, right? They will regularly argue against the legitimacy of a judiciary. They'll argue against the legitimacy of an opposition party, because these are all elements of an existing order that stands in the way, that impedes the voice of the true people, which is what the populist stands to represent, right? Now I'll say it, Donald Trump, I can channel and represent what true Americans, and he has a particular view about what true Americans are, need and want, and I can get it done. And those who stand in my way, even when they are legitimately elected,
is Trump or any number of other populists you can think of around the world, are they anti-democratic, or are you really talking about illiberalism here?
So we can find elements of both. When the conversation turns towards the illegitimacy of an opposition party, I would argue that that's anti-democratic. When the conversation turns towards the need for an independent press and the need for an independent judiciary, then we're in the realm of that which is illiberal. And that's why generalizing about populism is problematic. What I will say across the board, though, is that the opposition, the critique, is more mature than is the positive claim for what ought to replace the institutions and orders that stand in the way.
Well, you're talking about populists of the right largely, right? Not about populists of the left. That's an entirely different group in some sense from what you've just been talking about. In the sense that they're probably more democratic, They're probably more liberal. They have a different group that they want to attack, not so much the outsiders, the immigrants, but more, they're not as nativist. They're more
They're not as
against
nativist.
the rich.
I think that that's right, but they're just as willing, populists of the left, they're just as willing to take on an independent judiciary, an opposition party, an independent press. And so they have different boogeymen, and they have a different policy agenda that they're less concerned about the border and more concerned about the poor. But it is, again, broadly in opposition to professionals, political elites, those who are in power in broad sweeping terms. And can I just say something though about why this is happening all over the place?
I was about to ask.
Okay. So where does this come from, right? Where does it come from? To my mind, it comes from political failure. It comes from the challenges contemporary of modernity that governments are ill-equipped to grapple with, that they struggle to grapple with. So think about huge population movements from the global north to the global south. Think about automation and its structural effects on labor markets. Think about rising inequality between the rich and the poor. These big structural challenges that our existing institutions struggle to attend to present profound challenges that lead to a lot of harm being done. That is, there are disaffected groups. There are groups that have suffered because of these changes, and the governments have struggled to attend to those needs. And so the populist steps in and says, it isn't just that they failed but that they mean well. They failed because they could care less about you. They don't recognize you. And we as a country, we as a people have lost our way.
So Raghu, I think Will touched on some of these themes. You have, and so did you have left-wing and right-wing populism. You have communitarian and authoritarian styles of populism, cultural and economic, inclusive and xenophobic. Clearly, one thing that unites all populists is a disdain and distrust to society's elites. And in the last couple of decades, society's elites have been embodied in a single individual who arguably typifies or is exemplified by all three of us on the stage and maybe all 300 of you in this room as well. The name of this person is Davos Man. So what's wrong with us, and how should we change?
I don't think anything is wrong with us. I don't think that it's something necessarily of our doing. I'll come to precisely that in just a second. What I think has happened is the returns to skills and education have increased tremendously, especially at the top, which is why part of the reason for inequality, it's not just about people grabbing rents, it's that the shape of incomes have become much more skewed than they were in the past. And to get some of those incomes, you have to be really highly trained, have a degree from the University of Chicago, and go on to do a master's, if not a PhD. And a lot of people at the top are professionals who've made their way there. They feel that they've made it on their own steam. Of course, part of the problem in this meritocracy which is emerging is that it's very hard for some people to get on the first step of that ladder. And that's because they haven't, had early childhood, a good early childhood upbringing. They haven't been in a professional household where they hear many more words at an early age. They haven't had good nutrition. They haven't learned good work habits or behavioral habits. Jim Heckman says they're doomed by the age of 5. There's no way they can retrieve what they've already lost by that time. Now, after that, they have lousy schools. Those schools don't let them get into any reasonable university. If they do get in, they spend half the time trying to cope with courses that they really can't master. They take on a whole lot of debt. They drop out. So a lot of people...
But stop for a second, because you're not answering the question.
I am. I'm coming to it.
You're answering what the problem with the proverbial Trump voter is, or the dissatisfied voters. What I'm asking you is, let's have an honest analysis of a group of people who probably feel greater affinities towards friends in London and Singapore, global financial capitals, who have almost certainly never served in the military, whose views on traditional matters of faith, morality are divorced, shall we say, from those of most people in the country with whom they have, or where they are citizens, and whose own sort of affinities as citizens are sort of attenuated because they think of themselves as fundamentally people of the world who happen to have a blue or a red or a green passport.
Right. You bring the issue back to nationalism. I think the issue first starts with economics. Let's deal with the economics, then we'll get to the nationalism. The economics itself works against these people who don't get access, right? That's where the anger stems from. They don't have an ability to walk up the ladder of opportunity, which is why they're really very angry. The status is slipping, partly because the economic ability is slipping. Now, a lot of it is technological. Technology also drives the globalization that we've seen over the last so many years. Nobody's to blame for it. It's actually something which has been fairly beneficial overall for the world. But of course, people have got hurt and people have lost opportunity. Now that's where you want to start. And I think after that, you can ask what the remedy is. And the remedy is not nationalism. That's far from the remedy. The remedy is something else, trying to fix the economic opportunity that these people lack. That seems to me much better than saying, oh, these are elite citizens of nowhere, they congregate in Davos. I mean, Davos does pretty much nothing. People get, Bob's been there many times, and we've sat there wondering, what do all these people actually do here? There's a lot of meetings.
Millions of people will ask the same question.
What they do is, actually, a lot of business people get their meetings done there very quickly because they're all there. It's a network. Do they actually change global opinion any? Harder to say. My sense is, yeah, it's good that they talk, but it's not clear that any global policies emanate from that. There's a sense that somehow there are dark rooms there that people congregate and plot the future of the world. Doesn't actually happen. A lot happens back home in countries. Now, the question countries have to figure out is how do we get these people out of where they are? How do we give them a better future? That's plain economics. Culture is an overlay. I think it's very important, but it's an overlay. It's not the fundamental.
But dig a little deeper into the question of nationalism, because populism, I think, in some sense stems from the perception that the people who have benefited most economically as well as culturally from the organization of the economy and the system of politics, that their deepest emotional ties don't go back to the countries from which they came. And nationalism has become a dirty word, but nationalism can also, in some senses, be a synonym for patriotism, can be about a deep care for what this country is about, what its traditions amount to, why they're valuable, why they're worth sustaining, and why the people who lead the country economically as well as politically ought to care for them. Now, why is that? Why isn't that a perfectly justifiable critique of who the rest of us have become?
I think it's important to say that the elite establishment, whatever you want to call it, should care for the people in the country. It's less clear that there is a certain kind of cultural predisposition that they should have, which sort of is something that defines them as being in the in-group or in the out-group. I don't think the fact that you actually congregate with people from other countries necessarily means that you don't care for your own country. I think it just means that you have a larger worldview. For people to say just because you meet in Davos or because you have a more cosmopolitan culture that you adhere to, that you don't actually care for the people of your country. I'm not sure where that comes from. There is a sense of anger for sure, but that anger, to my mind, is primarily economic. The nationalism is an overlay on that.
It seems to me that the foundational problem is big structural change of the swarm that you've described here in terms of the economy that leaves some people who are left out, and that the problem is the failure of states to adequately address the challenges that they meet. What I would call not just culture, but the overlay is the nationalist is another sort of overlay. But when you then see rich people in fancy settings like this congregating, and you have a sense that you have been left out, and there have been no concerted effort to reach communities like communities on the south and west sides of Chicago, while unbelievable wealth is being accumulated in the downtown area, that leads to all kinds of, well, when the populace steps forward and says they don't care about you, and you know what, and they racialize the claim, and then they caricaturize the folks who are congregating, then those kinds of claims resonate. If the state were more effective in addressing the needs of these people.
I sometimes feel that this conversation lets itself off too lightly, because we immediately say, you just said this, they racialize, who those people, that is to say us, are, rootless cosmopolitans. There's something kind of at the core of the Bannonite critique, if you will, which is not an unserious critique of the elites, which is simply this. Probably, and I'm sure there are many exceptions in this room, but probably very few of the children of the people in this room are going to serve in the Army or the Navy. Okay, they are not going. Their kids are not going to be on the line the next time some leader decides to invade Iraq or keep troops in Afghanistan or do something that entails the kinds of sacrifices that go into the construction of nationhood, right? And that's actually, there's some validity, right?
But is the failure of the people in this room not that they are not sending their kids into the military, but that they aren't doing as much as they could do to fight for a more progressive tax code? It seems to me the latter matters a whole lot more when you think about affecting the problem at hand, which is about dislocation and its associated disaffection associated with structural changes in the economy.
Right, and many of the kids in this room, the MBA, the people doing an MBA, I mean, they've changed over time. It used to be many of them went into finance. Now many more of them go into social entrepreneurship. Many of them want to do good. Now, it seems to me that's as patriotic as fighting in the military. Why should it be that only one kind of action is regarded as national or nationalistic? I mean, there are so many ways of serving your nation. It doesn't just have to be fighting in the military.
Provided it's serving a nation.
Well, it could be serving a nation. It could be serving the world. I mean, I think the guys serving in the UN and going into really hot spots of the world, they're as courageous as people in the military, and they're doing something valuable for the world. Why is that something less, in any sense, than being in the military in a country? You know, those people who just got killed, where did they get killed? In those UN staffers. I mean, these are young people who are idealistic. Why is it that we impose one set of ideals on them and say that is the true ideal you have to have?
So it's clear that populism has both a kind of there's an aspect of cultural resentment, there's an aspect of economic dislocation. So let's dig a little more deeply into both of these things. One of the drivers, I think, quite obviously, is immigration. And in periods where you have relatively high net immigration, as you've had in Europe for many decades, in the United States today, we're reaching, I think, the peak of our foreign-born population since at least the turn of the last or the previous century. you get a form of populism that very easily shades into xenophobia. And people are mad to feel like strangers in their own country, and they react in ways that aren't always the nicest, aren't always the most rational. David Frum had an interesting piece, I don't know if you read it, in The Atlantic, basically making the argument that if you want to save immigration as an American ideal and as something that we have in practice, we need to be able to limit it, and limit it quite sharply. What do you make of that analysis, and what do you make of basically the role of immigration in inflaming populism?
So it's certainly, there's a reason why it's our own president's kind of signature issue. It's good politics for him. And there's a reason, too, why when you had the peak of immigration in Europe, you saw populist parties across Europe making real headway. And then when you saw an abatement of immigration flows, you also saw a reduction in the gains that populist parties had made. So yes, it is worth, I think, to my mind, distinguishing immigration as perceived threat and what we ought to be doing about it from, look, immigration is a bit like trade. It's, in the main, it's really good for the country. In the main, we want a healthy immigration flow. But when you see governments who are not adequately controlling it, then there's a sense that our political systems, right, our political system, are being overrun by these larger forces of modernity, which again invites populists to step in. The other piece of this is that then it isn't just the kind of the vulnerabilities that are revealed by immigration, the vulnerabilities of the state, but that when there are certain groups who suffer, to say that it is good for the country as a whole isn't to say that there aren't some populations who lose their jobs. And then the question is, what are we doing on behalf of those populations? In the same way, what do we do on behalf of globalization or trade, which in the main, economists will tell you, you will tell us, that it's a good thing, right? It is, but it's not universally a good thing for all folks. And then the question is, what is being done on behalf of those populations who are losing their jobs and who are seeing their communities founder? And there's real failure. And so the move that David Frum makes is to say what we ought to do is constrain immigration. An alternative response is what we ought to do is to attend to those people who are dislocated, those who do suffer from, be it immigration or from trade. The state ought to be doing more on behalf of them.
Like what?
Well, there's all sorts of things. I mean, if you look at, with regard to trade, the Trade Adjustment Authority is
a joke.
It's a joke, right? There's very little done, both in terms of the kind of the training that's offered, the opportunities to move, the investments in communities.
But what's an immigration adjustment?
So what you would want to look at are those particular populations who stand to lose their jobs, right? And the question is, how might we retrain them? How might we reinvest in them? Because this inflow of a particular population is a threat to them. So yes, in the main, it is a good thing. But to say that in the main it is a good thing isn't to say that there aren't some populations that struggle. So we ought to look at the particular claims that they have and the particular ways in which they struggle and attend to them.
Is there something you can do for the intelligentsia that's displaced by more intelligent immigrants coming and taking the jobs of professors?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good.
Just on this, I mean, when we had the previous wave of populism, I mean, one of the things that happened was we had a very strong high school movement in the United States in the late 19th century. And what that high school movement did was trained native kids, native-born kids, at a much higher level, enabling them to get factory jobs which required higher skills. While many of the immigrants were really very good at carpentry, very good at working with their hands, but didn't have trigonometry, didn't have algebra, and couldn't get those jobs in the factories. So the high school movement did wonders along the lines of what you're saying for enabling locally born kids or native-born kids to actually get a march ahead of the immigrant population, because the immigrant population wasn't as well trained. So that's an example of what could be done if we really
community
put our
college
minds
today, I would argue.
Or that would be community college today. But look, I mean, countries have actually fixed this in much better ways than the United States does today. Sweden, for example, and everybody's going to say Sweden is a special case, homogeneous population, etc. It's much less homogeneous now than it used to be. They have their own problems, but they really took at trade adjustment in a serious way because they really have to adjust to trade. They're a small country slapped around by the waves of trade flows. What they do is really have counselors go into factories, talk to the workers, here's what you're doing, how are you keeping up your skills? What are you doing to reinvest? When workers lose their jobs, these guys go back. Within a couple of days, they have interviews with the counselors, and the counselors basically tell them, here are the 3 courses you need to do in order to be reemployable. And that's supported. This is what they call active labor market policies. It works. It works.
Well, this comes to the second driver that I think is affecting populism, which is technological change. We have a president who I think arguably owes his presidency to his mastery, if mastery is the word, of social media, of Twitter. Maybe other presidents' mastery of Twitter as well, but that's another story. But you've been someone who's argued that actually social media can be, it doesn't necessarily need to be a vehicle for misinformation, fake news. It can build communities. So talk about this social media as a means of counteracting populism rather than reinforcing it.
Right. I mean, as you just said, I mean, technology can do both good and bad, depends on how you use it. And historically, I think when we look at technologies, not all technologies, but certainly communication technologies, they first move out in an uncontrollable way, and you see some of the bad along with the good. Over time, we learn to filter out some of the bad. We have structures, institutions that build up to prevent the bad and focus on the good. What's the good side of social media? Well, my kids keep in touch with all their college roommates, classmates, etc., in a much easier way than we do. They go to a town, it's just one post and everybody meets. We can't do that because we're not in the same sort of, we didn't enjoy the same technology until too late. Now it's too late to make friends again. That's an example
I'm mainly in the business of losing friends, so that's...
That's an example of technology working well. Of course, we have the incels who also keep together through technology. The incels are the involuntary celibates,
Yes.
who essentially feel that people of the other sex have essentially done them in and unfortunately go after them in terrible ways. They come together, they communicate their hate over social media. That's a problem. Over time, we will figure this out. We will use technology to screen some of this out. We're already in the process of doing it. We will have structures to monitor this. Hate speech will become more controlled. It will never be eliminated, but we'll figure it out. Now, so I hope that what happens is the kind of overlay on real relationships that technology, the technological relationships allow us to establish will actually strengthen the real relationships. There are examples in my book on how this happens, but there is hope. It's not all downstream with technology, and my sense is essentially we will create new institutions.
Do you really think that Trump got elected because he's good at Twitter?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. No, I'll tell you why. I mean, if I could just offer this, Twitter was a brilliant vehicle for getting over the middleman, which was us, the media. Previously, all social messages from politicians had to be filtered through this kind of grand editing mechanism, which was the press. That's how politicians communicated with their followers, with people. Trump eliminated that. That was, I think, historic.
So, alternative, to throw out something, which is he got a tremendous amount of free press in traditional media because he was presenting himself as an outsider who was offering a set of arguments that were populist in orientation, that tapped into deep disaffection not just within the Republican Party, but also within some crucial independents, and that it wasn't because he had particularly smart tweets to send. It wasn't because there was a technology that allowed it, but because there was a population who was, for whom his arguments resonated. And just the technology by itself isn't what delivered him into the White House, so much as it was a broader sense that the Republican Party, as with the Democratic Party, as with the Washington establishment, was failing to attend to core needs of key constituents. And that's
I mean,
what,
I think there's
that's what
some
did
truth
it.
to that, but with each tweet, what he managed to do was communicate sheer contempt for various establishments, not the least of which was the establishment that I inhabit.
Yes. But those, and his
The,
contempt.
the dirty, disgusting, corrupt
Right.
Enemy of the people.
And
Me.
yes, 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 you.
Yeah.
No, but I wonder. It'd be interesting to replay the 2016. I don't want to replay the 2016 election, but to replay it without Twitter. My guess is he got a tremendous amount of coverage in traditional media outlets, where and rallies that he was holding that also would have been vehicles for.
Well, but let's
campaign.
go to that, Will, because you wrote a book in 2016, which means I suppose you were writing it in 2014, 2015,
Right.
with Terry Moe at Stanford, arguing that we needed to change the Constitution and have radically strengthen the powers of the presidency. Had you gotten your way by some miracle,
Yes.
in say the fall of 2016. You would be living in a different country. I don't want to presume to know what your personal political views are, but have you had any reason to rethink your thesis?
That's right. Yeah. Well, yeah, you're not the first. You're not the first. And
I thought of it
in
by
the opening
myself.
remarks, like it is part of my introduction. It was we're gonna hear. He is the author most recently of, and then there's this book, and we've got to have the second book in there because there's more to say. Here's what I would say. Which I do believe, which is that if you are worried about populism, as I think the three of us are on the stage and many of us in this audience are, they see it as a threat to democracy, a threat to our country. You need to think seriously about effective government. You need to think about how do we get institutions that can address challenges associated with things like structural changes to the economy for sure, like systematic reform on immigration, like climate change. There are big challenges that we face. And presidential leadership, this is not an argument about Trump. This is an argument about where do we find the leadership that we can reasonably hope for in order to attend to these kinds of issues. And
Is this effective government, just be more specific, effective government as in there is a direct communication between the will of the president and policy making, or effective government as in actually solving the problems?
Solving problems that are national in scope and long term on their own terms. That is, you don't think about climate change, when you think about climate change, you don't think about tax policy as an opportunity to write in all kinds of carve-outs and exceptions to every local organized interest in your community, but you rather think about tax policy in the service of larger issues involving income redistribution or and the like, right? So our tax code, I would suggest, is totally incoherent. In the same way I would say our immigration policy is totally incoherent. And so in the realm of that which is coherent, you can have big disagreements that the folks on the right and the left would have about the proper role of government and the like. But to meet the challenges that we face on their terms and to actually do something meaningful about it.
But how is this, I can't decide while listening to you whether you're offering the ideal vehicle for a populist or a way
I'm talking about the antidote
of,
to populism.
Why isn't that just a vehicle? I mean, right now you're going to have a world in which Marine Le Pen may be the next president of France, the AfD may come to power in Germany, Matteo Salvini is running Italy, Donald Trump is in the United States, and Doug Ford will be Prime Minister of Canada before you know it.
So this is the second book. So I will send it to you. It is, because here's the thing, right? This is the thing, is that on the one hand, there's the promise of presidential leadership, which we need. The idea that we should respond to Trump by pinning everything down, wrapping him in the office that he occupies up in chains, and say, oh, thank goodness we avoided that catastrophe. let us carry forward, is to miss the very reason why he was elected in the first place, which is he argues against this rigged, failed political system that doesn't care about the very populations we just were talking about for 15 or 20 minutes.
And the title of this book is?
Reckoning.
Oh, okay.
Right?
For
The
you
American
or for
presidency,
someone else?
For us. In that, no, for us as a country, is that, I know, okay. So us as a country, okay, that's cute. That's cute. Yeah. For us as a country, that if what you want to, if you want to look for the leadership that we need in order to get effective government, good luck finding it within Congress and the courts. And that we need to leverage the kind of leadership responsibly in limited, targeted ways that presidents have.
I want to leave plenty of time for audience questions, so I'm just going to move the conversation forward to the subject of capitalism, since that was in the title. And I'm obliged. So 40 years ago, Irving Kristol wrote a famous essay titled "Two Cheers for Capitalism." And the missing cheer, in his view, was the idea that capitalism wasn't constructing sort of strong-souled individuals. You would, I think, make the case, two cheers for capitalism, where the missing cheer comes around the question of community and community building. And this is a very old story. I mean, capitalism destroyed agrarian societies in the 19th century. It destroyed industrial societies in the late 20th century. And eventually it's probably going to destroy what we call the knowledge-based economy at some point, maybe in this century. So I guess the question is, what's new this time? And what can we learn from past disruptions to inform what's certain to be the next disruption?
Well, I think in each of these cases, you saw technology playing a very important part. So what's common is technology does seriously affect capitalist societies, and it imposes on it the duty to sort of rethink the form of capitalism and say, what can we do to make it work again? In each of these cases, there are disaffected groups, seriously disaffected groups, and if you let it run, you would have had in those times the same kinds of populist reactions. So, I mean, when you look at industrial countries today, I mean, if you look at overall GDP, if you look at inflation, if you look at unemployment, aggregate numbers look wonderful. Look, I mean, in this country, growth is not gangbusters, but 2.5% is what most people would say is US potential growth. Unemployment, 3.7%. What's to complain about that? We are very far from the misery index in 1980 when Carter was there and inflation was through the roof, as was unemployment. So why are people so angry? They are angry because it's very, very differentiated within the country. You have pockets of affluence, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, and pockets of deep despair, sometimes within the same cities, but often in semi-rural and small towns. So the question really is, will the old methods of generating growth, fiscal stimulus, monetary stimulus, get us anywhere, or should we think differently? And that's what I really think countries have to do. They have to think differently, because today, developed countries have very many islands of deep underdevelopment. And the real problem is one of development, not of stimulus. It's how do we get these to start again as areas. And so when we think about this, we often come up with, oh, it's place-based growth. So opportunity zones. Let's create opportunity zones. We will reduce the cost of capital flowing in, and that'll elevate those zones. In many of these zones, nobody actually wants to put in money simply because there's a tremendous amount of crime. You really can't start a business there until first you fix the crime. In some other area, there's no connectivity to anything. Why would you build anything there? So I think, paraphrasing Tolstoy again, happy communities are all alike. Every unhappy community is unhappy in its own way. And for Washington to determine what happens in each area is simply silly. It can't do it. And just pushing money into those areas is also silly. We've learned from many years of aid, going to poor countries, it doesn't work. It doesn't lift them. What does lift them is a sense that they can do it, they know what to do, they start working, and it starts creating a virtuous circle. That's how South Korea came out. I mean, look at every development, China, look at every development success. It's not something the pundits would have said, this is what you do. It's something they figured out which was really attuned to their circumstances. And that's what I think we see with successful communities. They figure it out, they start the process, then the outside comes in and helps.
Yeah.
But it's not the outside saying, hey, you guys, this is what you have to do.
Now, this is what the economist Bill Easterly talks about, the difference between searchers and planners. Before we go to audience questions, Will, close this out. Examples of statesmanship, past or present, that you think are inspiring or instructive when it comes to channeling, defeating the challenges of modern day or past populism?
Where I look is to the progressive era of the late 19th, early 20th century, and that was marked by a number of things. There was real attention paid to the need for institutional reform, coupled with a recognition that that our Constitution, our political institutions, were being challenged at that time by large forces of industrialization and immigration, which was the most sustained period in this country of real attention paid towards political reform. And it came in fits and starts. It was piecemeal, it was incomplete, and the argument, my suggestion here is not that the solutions that they came are ones that we should simply import in contemporary American life, but it was a good 30-year period where there were the kind of conversations that we're having up here all over the place in the service of real, meaningful institutional reform. And to my mind, that's what we need.
So what we're looking for is our own TR.
We need our own TR and also folks sitting around the kitchen table as well, talking about it as well. Because some of the reform is going to happen nationally by people in this room and us on these stages, and some of the reform is going to happen for school boards and local political organizations.
But the sobering thought is Theodore Roosevelt came in by assassination, not by election, right?
And on that happy note, why don't we open up to questions? I understand there are mics that are going to be roaming around, so why don't you, those of you who have questions, I know this is a U of C audience, so you won't be shy, and you won't be merciful either. You, sir, right there, if we can get a mic to you. Just tell us who you are.
Sure. Joy Reddy, Chicago GSB alum from 2005. Question about populism outside of the United States. One for Professor Rajan about Modi, and a question for Bret Stephens about Netanyahu. First question about Modi. The portrayal of him is that, in the Western press, is that he's India's version of Erdogan, and he's attacking all these popular institutions, and he's trying to transform India into much like what Erdogan's done there. Do you agree with that picture? And the question for Bret Stephens is on Netanyahu. Do you think he's a populist now, whereas it seems like he's a lot different than he was 20 years ago when I saw him in the 90s negotiating with Bill Clinton and Yasser Arafat?
Look, I typically don't comment on specific political leaders. Let me talk more broadly about the agenda of the... let me talk about the populist agenda of the NDA government, right? I mean, if you look at the policies broadly, I think, thus far they've been pretty middle of the road. In fact, they've espoused, on the economic front, espoused many of the policies that the previous Congress government was trying to do. I think if you look at the rhetoric, however, there is a underlying deep tone of majoritarianism, Hindu majoritarianism, in the entire sort of both the party as well as the RSS that surrounds the party, the large outside group. And you see that rhetoric coming into the election campaign. There are also other elements of the nationalist populist characteristic, which is the emphasis on national strength, that they are the only ones that can be trusted with defense, nobody else can, and if anybody else is talking about moderation, they are the weak links, they are sometimes even anti-national. In many ways, the language in electioneering is very much of the populist nationalist kind. Is this administration like Erdogan's administration? I think only time will tell.
With respect, I mean, I only speak specifically and aggressively about individuals. The difference between the University of Chicago and the Times.
No, central banker and the Times.
Well, look, Netanyahu's rhetoric is much more populist than his political behavior, which is to say, whenever he's in an election contest, you will hear tropes that have classic populist, often xenophobic or even outright racist connotations. He did this in 2015 during the election when he was afraid that he might lose. He warned, he went on radio to say Arab voters are coming out in droves. It was an extraordinarily ugly comment. He's repeated that behavior again, this time around by trying to orchestrate a political marriage with a Kochnik far-right, far-right party. If you look at his behavior as a leader, it's actually remarkably restrained. I mean, there have been at least 2 occasions in the last year or so when he resisted going to war in Gaza. In fact, he lost his defense minister, Avigdor Lieberman, over that very issue, that he's wary of going to war. He did not make good on his 2009 promise to reinvade and reoccupy Gaza and get rid of Hamas. He's been a very tactical leader in most respects. I mean, when I was editor of the Jerusalem Post, Ariel Sharon was prime minister, and both in body as well as in spirit, I always thought of Sharon as the classic hedgehog. He sort of knew one big thing. Whereas, by the same token, Bibi is the fox. He knows many things. And I think his behavior of kind of, to switch metaphors, of kind of constantly tacking according to, the prevailing winds bears that out. He's governed in a remarkably, and I mean this in the classic sense, remarkably conservative fashion. Yes? Stand up.
I know, okay, maybe you can hear me. One of the things nobody mentioned is that government has become too big. That government has become too big, and we don't really have competition in this country anymore. Basically, governments support the capitalists because they're too big and they benefit from it. Whereas when this country was found, or even in the beginning of the 20th century, I guess, people were allowed to compete more freely. And today, even if you want to start a hairdressing business, you have to train 16 months, then you have to wait another 6 months before you can start a hairdressing business. Now, if you're in Germany, maybe it's 3 months, but even
What's your question?
My question is that this government interferes too much in the lives of the average citizens. And if we had more competition, if we allow more competition, more people would be happy. The school, Dr. Rajan mentioned the schools. Why can't we oppose, let's say, the big, let's say, unions in education? the kids finish? I mean, I've dealt with some
Sorry,
of these
get to your
students.
question.
Right. The question is, this is all comes from the fact
Question.
that government and capitalism have become allies. And this is one of the problems that's why society has become
Okay.
divided.
Let me try taking a tack at that. I mean, the virtue of populist movements, I mean, we've been talking about the problems. The virtue of populist movements is they raise this kind of question. Why is opportunity crowded out for us? Why aren't we getting a step on the ladder of progress? And they ask, I think, the right questions. Now, whether the leaders have any of the right answers is a very different point. And to some extent, your sort of praise for the progressive movement, I mean, we must recognize that came after the first populist movement, which raised many of those questions, which morphed into the progressive movement and created societal change. And so my sense is the populists today are doing us a service by asking whether, in fact, the elite have gotten too cozy with each other, big corporations too cozy with the government, whether licensing, which you talked about, is too widespread, whether, in fact, we should tear some of this apart to give more breathing space for people. Now, these aren't the questions that the populist leaders are asking, but certainly this is something that probably will have to be tackled if, in fact, we want to...
Yes, I think, so
Well-
I don't think, for populists, their core concern is not about issues involving individual liberty. That's the story of the Tea Party. But
Well,
they
it's a
do
swamp,
raise
right?
these kinds of concerns.
Yeah.
But they do so in such sweeping terms. I mean, there are real, legitimate debates to be had about the scope of government and what the regulatory arm of the government ought to look like and when it ought to intervene and how it ought to intervene into the marketplace. There are real, legitimate debates to be had there. Populists are not presenting that in terms that allow for or invite fruitful discussion. They do so in a way that's kind of brute and the responsible response to them is to say, we ought to step back. I'm not hopeful, though, that speaking directly to those advocates of populism that we're going to get to a deeper place in how to attend to these issues.
I think they force us to reconsider the system. That, to my mind, is the benefit of the movement. They're telling us it's not working.
That's right.
Then we have to figure out how I mean, everybody has to figure out how to make it
One last
work.
piece on this, that they also have, this is in governance, populists, domestically and abroad, how to put this? They don't set to work on setting things right. They thrive off of continued failure. And in that way, they're not, to my mind, a force for productive change. That they raise this question, and we, as attentive listeners, when you say, like, what should we be doing? How have we failed? We ought to start taking these questions seriously and get to work. It isn't clear to me, though, getting to work with them is what's going to set things right.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Maya Arakon, and I'm from Turkey, and I'm a political exile. I'm a scholar in exile, and I had to leave Turkey 3 years ago, actually, for political reasons. And, well, when you were talking, when I came here in August 2016, 4 months later, Trump was elected president, and I was just like, this can't be happening. So, because I was just, escaping Erdogan, and I just, fell into the arms of Trump, and that was a nightmare for me, and I felt like I was cursed. But then, ever since I am here, everything happening in the United States reminds me of the days when Erdogan just came to the power. So I'll tell you, please don't get me wrong, but all the discussions we're leading here is nothing. Because the guy, when he came to the power, was already rich. Now he has a palace of 1,100 rooms.
So, but get to your question.
Yeah, we would never think that one day we would have a dictator at the head of Turkey. So, do you really believe that? Do you think that the system, the democratic system in the United States, the institutions are strong enough, are solid enough to stop someone like Trump or someone else to become one day a dictator without even noticing how it just happened?
Will?
Thank you.
I think the answer is yes and no. I mean, we hear you, right? Like, so in important ways, a number of people pointed out that when Trump was elected, this would constitute something of a stress test of our political institutions. And there are things that you can point to. He has been stopped and thwarted in all kinds of ways. He has not simply had his way. His efforts on healthcare and immigration have been halting at best. Where he's had success has been basically through unilateral action, and the kinds of policy actions where he has made advancements on tax and deregulations are the kinds of things that any standard run-of-the-mill Republican could have achieved. On the one hand, that's where we find some hope, right? On the other hand, I think that there's a real threat in place, just as there's a deep indictment of our political order, and that it is important for us to think seriously about the design of our political institutions, because the concern that I have has less to do with Trump and rather to do with a more disciplined, a more serious-minded would-be autocrat, where we could really see ourselves on our heel. And so there's real work to be done. We shouldn't simply take heart that, look at all the ways in which this particular president is being blocked, and he is being blocked in lots of ways. We need to do some hard, serious thinking about the design of our political institutions.
I mean, I would say one difference between the Turkish case and the American one is that in Turkey, your deep state was real even before Erdogan came to power, whereas ours was always farcical and actually non-existent. So Erdogan was able to turn the deep state and in fact just seize it for his own purposes, whereas there never was really a deep state in the United States. I mean, I don't think so.
There's an immigration problem here. He didn't have an immigration problem. So he uses this immigration problem for his plotting about invaders. Like, I am now an immigrant. I never thought that I would be an immigrant in the United States one day. I had a whole career, 25 years of life, destroyed overnight. So, I mean, anyone can just leave it. You were asking him, what would you think that if someone, a scholar, would steal your job? I am here. I am not to steal your job, of course.
But
So many scholars, we are scattered around the world. We just had to leave Turkey because of persecutions. So, I mean, and we never thought that
Yeah.
The system would fail.
But if she does steal your job, we will retrain you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just one question on that, because I thought we left out one aspect here, which is the longer a president stays in power, the more he molds the system in his shape, right? You've already talked in your recent book about how the judiciary is now being filled by sympathetic judges. And I think what you see with these autocrats is the first term is fine. And the system works as advertised, the institutions stand up, but you're slowly undermining the institutions by putting in sympathetic people. You get promoted if you're sympathetic to the regime, and soon the investigative agencies become your friend, as opposed to the deep state.
And notions of truth are degraded, and democratic norms are eroded.
Yes,
This is
so
all,
it's a
and
matter.
these things take time.
And I think that was what she was saying, that it started off in a different way, and then it turned into a nightmare. And that's something we have to be cognizant of.
Let's go for another question, but I'm just going to warn you, no statements or speeches, just try to keep it to one sentence or two. And in the far back, that hand, yeah, there you are.
Don't worry, Brett, I'll keep it quick. Clay Nickens, BA 2014, MBA 2020, thanks for being here this evening. If I can get back to the books that you all have written, between Mr. Rajan's recent book and Mr. Howell's forthcoming book, you identify a similar concern with the rise of populism. The solutions, though, that you propose are different. Mr. Howell looks to an empowered president, an empowered federal government in the United States, and Mr. Rajan to local communities. Are your solutions contradictory, or are they complementary? And if they're complementary, in what places might we anticipate tensions between the two?
What a good question.
Brilliant. Okay, look, in some ways they are complementary. My sense of what we need is a strict principle of subsidiarity, which means push down decisions to the lowest level at which they can be handled. There are some decisions that cannot be pushed down below the central government level, for example, national defense or immigration policy. But there are many decisions that can be pushed down to the local level and should not be taken up. And what I argue in the book is markets becoming bigger and global have tended to push the level of decision making up, up, and up. And that's become problematic, and we should try and bring them down, down, down. One example where you asked for examples where perhaps there might be a little bit of a contradiction is, take the most imperial of presidencies, the French presidency. And the French presidency is in deep trouble. Why is it in deep trouble with the Gilets jaunes? Because Macron, because of because of climate change and the desire to do something about it, said, we're going to raise gasoline taxes. So that was nationwide uproar because some of these Gilets jaunes said, you're thinking about the end of the world, we're struggling to live to the end of the month. So we have very different ambitions than you have. But that wasn't the worst of it. That was part of it. The other part of it was a national speed limit at 80 kilometers per hour, regardless of the area. So, of course, the communities rose up because some of them were remote communities. They thought, speeding was fine because they had to get to work in a finite time. They used their cars a lot, and they went mad at that. So that's a place where the imperial presidency, pushing down a one-size-fits-all to fulfill a global policy, created the kind of anger and reaction which made it much harder. So the only caveat, I agree with Will that we need to make the federal government function. It could make mistakes like this. And of course, in a polarized world, it could also have the effect that you have one set of policies with this very able president, and it flips over significantly with the next able president. And we need to think about how that would create, whether that volatility could be reduced somehow. Today we have no change.
That's a general problem, though.
Yeah.
The concerns about policy volatility can play out locally just as they can play out nationally.
Absolutely. But locally they do less damage. They do local damage as opposed to national damage. That's all.
True. So when you think about the big challenges that we domestically face, it's hard to see how it doesn't require, at least in part, a national response. When you think about immigration policy, climate change, inequality between the rich and poor, that part of it is. Now, even if you have really smart, effective policy in those spaces, again, we're going to have some local communities that are going to be disproportionately mal-affected. And that's where, to my mind, the local response is really going to be important. And so I think where we come together is a recognition for the need for deep institutional reform. We have our eyes on different places, and I think you're primarily concerned about rejuvenating and rehabilitating local political institutions, and I'm concerned about the capacity of our federal government to respond to national and international problems. They don't have to be at odds with one another.
Sir, right here.
I'll just shout out.
It's coming.
Stand up.
All right. So, we talked a lot about populism. I would like to hear more about the book Professor Rajan has written and have him address as a question answer what are the dangers he's seeing to capitalism as in future. And if you go back, I was just reading somewhere, it's like Karl Marx anyway predicted that capitalism will be in due time, once the society becomes sufficiently industrial, will be replaced by socialism. So are we following Karl Marx, or what are the concerns that you talk about for capitalism?
Well, very quickly, because we've talked about a lot of this, I'm not predicting the demise of capitalism. I'm just saying we need to work on fixing some of the problems that have emerged and make it work again for all, which I think it is in many ways the best system for producing wealth and prosperity. But we need to make it also distributed prosperity, and we need to. I think we've talked about some of that. We need to make it easier for people to access those good jobs. So we need to create more of those good jobs, but we need to make it easier for them to access those good jobs. That requires a whole lot of work by the state, local communities. We've had some examples of whether the state may be overbearing. There are lots of suggestions in Will's book and in my book, but really I think the broader point is that we can remake it. And I, for one, believe that since we are on the topic of capitalism, populism, and democracy, that capitalism and democracy go together. It's very hard to imagine a socialist state which is democratic. I challenge you to name one, and don't say Sweden. Sweden is not socialist, at least in the traditional sense. So that way, if we want to preserve a liberal democratic society, it seems to me that we have to work on remaking capitalism. We don't have many other alternatives that have worked. And how do we make it work again? That's really our challenge.
Somewhere on this side, you, sir?
Thanks for coming. Professor Rajan, as a central banker, can you give me your thoughts on modern monetary theory? And for the panel, what does the current budget and the current budget proposals by both sides say about our national priorities?
Will, you want to take the...
Well, I don't see a serious-minded effort in the current budget to attend to the very kinds of problems we've just described at all. And it's in this way that, and I don't mean to be excessively partisan, but I think it's in this way that populists in their presentation offer something of a bait and switch. They come out and say, you have been ignored, your government doesn't care about you, and this lying press, right, is selling you out. But they don't meaningfully step forward and then offer meaningful redress to precisely those people who are being disaffected. There isn't a serious-minded reform that's put forward about comprehensive immigration reform for all the talk about the need for attention to the problem of immigration. There isn't a serious-minded effort to attend to the efforts of former manufacturing sectors that have experienced tremendous job losses. And so that's why, again, to my mind, it's something of a bait and switch. There's a claim about representing the needs of the people, of certain kinds of people, that doesn't then lead to a systemic policy or institutional response.
As a central banker?
On modern monetary theory, just for the assembled audience, what it basically seems to suggest is that you can print money at certain times and fund fiscal expenditure. My sense is that times in which you can print money, pretty much periods like now of very low interest rates, are periods when in fact money is like debt. So all you're saying is, look, you can finance activity with more debt, and the answer is yes, you can do it until people stop holding your debt. And at some point, they will stop holding your debt. The question is, what point will that be? And so in that sense, I'm not sure it offers a whole lot of new stuff, except it's saying to those who want to spend, you can have it all. Reality is you can't. At some point, if you spend and the spending is not, in a sense, revenue generating over time, the public stops wanting to hold your paper, whether it's debt or currency, and that's when you become Zimbabwe or Venezuela. So now the point is, I think the danger is you can go a long way before suddenly confidence turns. But it could turn eventually, and in fact, it's hard to imagine the laws of economics holding without it turning. I think the modern monetary theorists will say we can stop long before then. But sometimes it's hard to know when you're beyond that point, because as the environment changes, you may find you've left that point behind.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Is that right? I would just add to this that Paul Krugman and I don't always find ourselves in agreement. We agree that zombies are bad, and so is MMT. Somewhere on this side. Yes, ma'am.
We're hearing earlier that the real issue is economic. And the question I have for the panel is, do you see any candidates on the national scene that seem to have strong economic skill sets and sensibilities when they're crafting solutions?
Will?
Who are you going to vote for?
I don't have a vote. I'm an immigrant.
So here's what I would suggest. Rather than putting money on any particular candidate, it seems to me if you're a Democrat and you want to run against this president, the smart move is not to run against Trump and all his excesses and work yourself up into a lather about the awfulness that is Donald Trump, and to rather turn your attention on the very real problems that we as a country face. And that the more you can talk about that in a serious and sustained way, there will be, the benefits will be multiple. There will be benefits in terms of
trying to isolate
who.
Economic skill sets.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. I think we've been talking largely about the economy.
Solutions that really work.
But I don't know how much of this is about the economy and how much of it is about attending to the threats and challenges associated with immigration, which are real. That's not strictly or exclusively economic in orientation.
On the topic of economics, to the extent that we have these candidates, are we seeing any skill sets out there where people really have a true understanding of things that can work?
I haven't seen any.
Okay, let's go to another question. Yes.
Sylvia Neal. I'm going to claim some authority to ask my question because we do have a son that served in the military. Anyway, I want to go back to populism for a second. I want to go back to populism. I felt that something that you guys left out was this question. Why, with the same kind of bad education system, bad opportunities, and so on, would an immigrant peasant from Vietnam, let's say, have their family make it better than somebody with those same opportunities and lack of education, let's say, from somebody from the Ozarks?
Why wouldn't? Why do we see advancement for one group but not for the other?
And I mean, the peasant from Vietnam immigrant tends to make it more than the guy from the Ozarks. I'm broadly stereotyping, but I think you're getting to where I'm going because I was told to ask a very brief question.
I mean, I mean, there is a little bit of selection bias there, right? Which is that the immigrant from Vietnam has crossed oceans, dealt with immigration officers who wanted to keep him out, and has shown a hunger for arriving, which often suggests that they've dealt with challenges and may actually be willing to take them on in the country that they come to. I mean, I think there are some results on immigrants who travel large distances across seas versus immigrants who walk across borders. There's some differentiation there. But I think that that kind of desire to make themselves in this new world could be part of why they differ. Of course, in many situations, they don't really do better in their lives than perhaps that person in the Ozarks. But their children do better. So the next generation, and
I would add the inner city to that. I would add the inner city, and I think this has been true of generations, where people have come with no education, going into the same system, and so I'm asking in terms of this populism. Don't you think there's some sense of entitlement, some sort of, it's not just about the elites, but don't you think there's some sort of anger at somebody, maybe not being really on welfare, but sort of taking something they're entitled as opposed to, you know, and in my family, I'm the lefty here in this family by far, okay? But I think there was something left out of the discussion about why would somebody take exactly those same, you know, let's say destitute circumstances, including no education themselves, and be able to bootstrap themselves, whereas other people are not able to. And I'm not sure that the economic analysis that's been given or the so far, you know, really gets to that, to the brunt of that.
Well, I'll just end here by saying, look, there is an environment they create of expectation for their children, you know, the stereotype that, you know, you really have to do really well in class to please your parents, those kinds of things. And it is, again, it is possible that a certain group immigrates, and if you took the average back there where they immigrated from, you may not find the same thing. So I don't want to make it national differences. It's differences in populations between the immigrant who's traversed a lot of challenge and existing populations. There could be a difference.
Your question stimulates my curiosity. I'm wondering if we can have a show of hands. Who in this room is either an immigrant or the child of immigrants? Raise your hands. Wow. All right, one final question, and I think we'll close it out. Yes. Yeah.
Do we think changing the Electoral College would make a difference in populism?
Floor is yours, Will.
Yes. Yes, we do. So if you are a small d Democrat, I think there's very little to say on behalf of the Electoral College that holds much weight. And the distortion that it presents to the popular will and the expression of popular interests is profound. And there's a certain irony that in our last election, the very individual who was lambasting a political order that was rigged against him was delivered by the very institution that does the most to distort the popular representation of public views, namely the Electoral College, that had it simply. So yes, a caveat is that if you're worried about money in politics, if that's something that concerns you, were we to get rid of it, watch the money really kick in, because now $1 spent in every single community, to the extent that it returns a vote that has some impact on my ability to win the office, is going to raise. It's going to raise the roof on how much money is actually being spent. That when the contest is focusing on a handful of states, they're diminishing returns on dollars spent. You get rid of the Electoral College, you can expect a whole lot more money being spent. So that's something to watch. But yeah, I think most every political scientist, certainly that I know, who reflects on this particular institution, would be happy to get rid of it.
Well, listen, thank you so much for coming. Thank you to our wonderful panelists.
Thank you, Bret.
And it was a very U of C kind of conversation. I feel like it's more of the beginning of a conversation than the end of it. So thank you.
That was great.
That's great.
Ladies and gentlemen, the reception is going to continue till 9 o'clock. Thank you.